The mighty Quinn.
Hey, there's Skip.
How you doing, buddy?
Good. I feel like I know you so well just from watching your shows.
Finding your roots. I
So,
love it. We have we have the biggest ratings ever, so it's going well.
real, that's amazing. I mean, I'd love to do a show like that. Can you see me?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, all right. I can't see myself.
I can see you perfectly, and it's being
Okay,
recorded. So
all
let's
right,
roll, buddy. Let's
all
roll.
right. So, when did you get started in all this, and how did it all take off?
Well, my interest in genealogy actually began, I know the date, in Cumberland, Maryland, which is halfway between Pittsburgh and Washington, right up the Potomac, the home of the Gateses for hundreds of years, on July 3rd, 1960. Why do I know the date? I know the date because my grandfather, my father's father, Edward St. Lawrence Gates, was buried on July the 2nd. And I was 9 years old. My father took my brother and me up to the casket in the Kite Funeral Home in Cumberland and to do a viewing of the body. And I was just struck by how white he looked. I mean, he was so white.
You almost look Greek.
What'd you say?
You almost look Greek. He was so white.
No, he looked like a Greek statue. He looked like he was coated in alabaster and sprinkled with baby powder. And I remember thinking that how could I be descended from this man with my physical features, my phenotype? My father looked like a white man, and my grandfather looked like a ghost. In fact, we called him Casper behind his back. and then that night, my father showed my brother and me a picture of the oldest Gates,
Yeah.
Jane Gates, who was born a slave in 1819. She died on January 6, 1888. And then he showed us her obituary. And it said, died this day in Cumberland, Maryland, Jane Gates, an estimable colored woman.
Now, let me interrupt you for a minute and just ask you a question that a lot of people don't like to talk about really in America. And I think it should be talked about because it's an unfortunate part of our history, but it's a part of our history. Do you know anything about who her master was?
No, we don't. That's an excellent question. But we don't, oddly enough.
Yeah.
And, the area around Cumberland was very small. And remember, the only way that you could find who owned a person would be to find their name in that person's estate papers, inventory, tax records, or their will. But the way that we usually go about finding that is to say, if you were a Black person named Bradlee, and we found your ancestor in the 1870 federal census, which is the first census in which all Black people are listed by name because it's the first one done after the Civil War. And before the Civil War, enslaved people weren't listed in the federal census, with a very few exceptions, just a few counties for reasons we don't even understand. I mean, a handful of counties. So, but when we look in 1860 in Allegheny County, Maryland, there are no Gates, they're owning slaves. So we don't know where she got the surname Gates, probably from her ancestors. Because remember, African enslaved people have been coming to British North America since 1619 and to Florida since 1526. So we don't know. But anyway, I was so traumatized by seeing my grandfather's corpse up close and then seeing this picture of this odd looking lady who had been a slave, who didn't look anything like, my father, my grandfather, or me, that, I went to bed and that was, on my mind. So the next day, July 3rd, I went to the colored 4th of July picnic, as we would call it back then. Remember, it's 1960. And on the way back, I asked my father to stop in Red Bull's newsstand, which we would today call a small convenience store, and buy me a composition book. And that night, in front of our little 12-inch black and white television, I interviewed my parents at the age of 9 about what only years and years later I would learn is called one's family tree or one's genealogy. Because I wanted to know how I could be the grandson of a man who looked white with straight hair and aquiline features, and how he could be the grandson of a woman who was clearly of African descent. So that's how it all got started. And then in the year, 1977, along with everybody else in America, I watched Roots and was deeply moved. And you could say,
what was going on before you?
Roots
was going on before you?
Yeah. This was Alex Haley's film on ABC, the docudrama. It was the first time that any American, first time in the history of television, anyone showed a docudrama every night for a week. And it got a phenomenal number. Everybody in America watched, it was amazing. It's got 100, fact check, but well over 100 million people were watching. And so you could say, Quinn, that I had a bad case of roots envy after that. I wanted to be like Alex Haley and find out where in Africa my ancestors came from. Yeah. And then in 2000, the year 2000, a Black man named Dr. Rick Kittles, Kittles, who was a geneticist at Howard, wrote to me and said, "Dear Dr. Gates, have you ever seen Roots?" And I thought, what kind of idiot does he think I am? Everybody's seen Roots. He said, "We can now do what Alex Haley believed that he did. We can do Roots in a test tube, Roots in a laboratory through your DNA." And he wanted volunteers. And I go, me. And he came up and he took my DNA, which at that time you had to take with blood. Yeah. To get a sufficient amount of tissue. And then he flew back to Washington. And finally, about 6 months later, I got my DNA analysis, which turned out to be wrong, but that's all right. And shortly after that, I woke up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom. And it was a gift from God. When I went into the bathroom, I did not have this idea. And I was standing there in the bathroom, and the whole idea that became Finding Your Roots just came to me, eureka, just like an epiphany. And I stood there, Quinn, with tears running down my face, because I knew it was a great idea. And that was it. I was launched. I just had to raise $6 million and put it all together.
So, I've been doing my story with genealogy starts the same as yours, except for I never met my dad's parents, because my grandfather was born in 1892. Wow. So I never met him. He was so old that his father died in an outhouse.
Wow. That's amazing.
And so I never met him. I never met my grandmother, whose last name was Josephine de Gersdorf. And she was one of the very first women to ever to be awarded the Légion d'honneur by the French government, because she helped Jews in Europe escape. What she did was she set up an orphanage basically for Jewish children, for Jewish parents to send their children to her, and she would take care of them. And since then, I now have 25,000+ people in my family tree.
Amazing.
Tree.com. I'm descended from all these notable people and everything like that. But I was researching my mother's side of the family because I didn't really know too much from her, except that, her family were all Southerners. And my father's family, obviously, were all Yankees and New Englanders. And, I'm just going, yeah, this is kind of boring. They're all from Europe and, they all live these lives and blah, blah, blah. I want something interesting. So I finally found that my mother is a descendant of the Lanier family. Now, one of the most famous Laniers is Tennessee Williams.
Wow.
The singer. So he's technically a cousin of mine. But, I start tracing the family back and back and back. They were originally Huguenots and they escaped France and went over to England and then came to America. But it gets even more interesting. They married into an Italian family. I was like, wait, I'm Italian? So they married into an Italian family called Bassano, and they were also musicians. Now, they and the Laniers were musicians for the royal families of England at the time in their courts. And I was like, all right, that's pretty cool. And then I traced back even further, and I go back all the way to that they were originally Muslim Sephardic Jews.
Wow.
I was like, wait, now I got Jewish blood in me. It gets even better. Yeah, and not one drop of Jewish blood. And that's the unfortunate thing about DNA is that it's not 100% accurate, but it's pretty close.
It disappears after a lot of generations,
But here's the kick. I find a website about the Bassano family, about this person who has traced their family, and they've done extensive research. They were originally Black Jews from Morocco. So I was like, if Skip Gates going to be interested in anything, he's going to be interested in that.
That's great. So they were Moors,
They were Moors. Do you know anything about Black Jews? Have you ever studied any of that?
Well, they would have been called Sephardic Jews.
Yeah, because they went to Spain.
Yeah, of course. And they ran Spain for 800 years.
Oh, they did?
Oh, yeah. The Moors ran Spain for 800 years, more than twice the length of the age of our nation.
I think I did know that because I know there are a lot of dark-skinned Spanish people as well because of that.
Yeah, and in 1492, three important things happened. Ferdinand and Isabella funded Columbus.
Yeah.
And Ferdinand and Isabella expelled all the Jews in the kingdom and all the Moors, all the Muslims. Yeah. And if you go to Granada, you'll see the Moorish architecture. It's beautiful.
Yeah.
And my wife and I did that a couple of years ago, right before COVID, as a matter of fact.
One of the most important, kind of a little sidestep from genealogy, but I remember my dad took me to South Africa one time. I'd never been to Africa, and I was so naive. I didn't really know even what to expect at all. And I mean, like the color of the skin, I wasn't even thinking about any of that at all. And I had no idea my dad met Nelson Mandela at the time because of my dad's boss, who was a billionaire. And I had no idea who I was about to meet, but my mother told Mandela about my story with dyslexia and how I struggled physically as a kid. Mm-hmm. And I met Mandela and was one of the only people to ever get a picture of him because his eyes were really messed up from being imprisoned. The flash of the camera hurt his eyes. And he put his arm around me and said, "I'm honored to meet you."
Oh, that's great, Quinn.
And it almost makes me cry a little bit every time I tell the story. But I was 16 years old. I had no idea who the hell I was meeting.
Hold on a minute.
I was so humbled by it.
Hold on a minute.
So I'm curious if you would be interested in covering that as a segment on your show, just how this 40-year-old white man can be descended from Black Jews.
No, we can't, because you're not a celebrity. You're a wonderful person. But did you apply for our average person competition?
No, I didn't. I didn't know. Do I just go to the website?
Yeah, but the deadline has passed. But we're going to do it again next year. We got over 8,000 applications.
Wow.
And so you have to go online to do that. But no, we only take celebrities because that's all people are interested in.
Yeah.
They would not tune in to a regular person, not even one as interesting as you.
So one of my questions is for you is that, I've read some articles that knowing about your family can actually help people with dyslexia it improves and raises their self-esteem.
Yeah.
Would you agree with that?
Well, I think that's true for everybody.
Yeah.
One of my heroes is the great physicist Stephen Hawking. And Stephen Hawking once said, "It is the past that tells us who we are. Without it, we lose our identity."
Yeah.
And I have never had a guest, first of all, who knew anything, never had a guest like you, who knows all these stories. Edward Norton, the actor, knew a lot,
Yeah.
but a lot of it was just myth, and we blew his mind despite the fact that he thought he knew.
He doesn't know as much as I know, though, about my family.
No, you know more than anybody in the world. But so I thought when I started this, only Black people were ignorant of their ancestry. But everybody is. Everybody knows their parents, unless you're adopted, your grandparents, but almost nobody knows the name of their great-grandparents.
Yeah.
And absolutely zero people know their great-great-grandparents.
It's amazing.
Yeah, the other thing that people don't realize is that the number of their ancestors doubles each generation.
Yeah.
So you have 64 fourth grade grandparents, and you have 128 fifth grade grandparents. Well, that's a whole lot of ancestors, as you very well know. And that's a lot of, but you actually inherit DNA from every ancestor back 6 generations. So that's back 180 years.
Yeah.
And then you inherit some DNA from most ancestors back just under 500 years. But after that, that's why you're a Moorish, Sephardic, Jewish ancestry, that goes back to 800 years ago.
Yeah.
It's gone. I mean, specialists in ancient DNA can analyze it, but not 23andMe and not Ancestry.com. Did you take both tests?
Yeah. Yeah. And, one of the things that I found that was really interesting is that I was like, okay, European, Irish, English, Scottish, that's got all that boring. I was like, European, boring. I was like, wait a minute, 0.3% Asian.
Yeah, wow.
And I actually traced some of my, when you're descended from royalty, you can trace those guys in all directions, all the way back.
Yeah, because they paid people to keep the bloodlines pure.
Yeah. So I have been able, through my dad's side of the family, to trace my family, his side of the family, all the way back to the Tang Dynasty of China.
What was your dad's name?
What was my dad's name?
Yeah,
Benjamin Crowninshield Bradlee. And
Ben Bradlee. And Ben goes back to the Tang Dynasty.
He goes back to the Tang Dynasty. We're descended from Emperor Gaozong.
I was going to say, I knew Ben. He didn't look Chinese to me.
Well, it's funny because I feel that I can tell you this because we know each other.
Hold on a minute. Hold on.
The funny thing about that is, according to my knowledge, my father was the darkest baby born in Boston of his time. And in fact, he was so dark, I feel like I can share this with you. They actually used to call him, because my dad was from Boston, they actually used to call him Boston Blackie. Now, at the time, you could get away with that, but you can't get away with that during this time.
No, I remember Boston Blackie. It was a TV show in the 50s.
Oh, okay. All right.
It was great. So we got time for, I'm sorry about that, but I had to do it. So give me 2 more questions.
Yeah. So
you only wanted to ask 2 questions, and we talked for half hour already.
Well, I feel like you and I have never actually had a one-to-one talk, just about anything.
I know.
I just wanted to get you a little bit more, see if we're actually related or not.
Well, you thought so, but I don't think we were.
Well, I mean, if you go all the way back, we're all African in the end. So if you go back, we're all related.
Yeah, but that's a hell of a family tree,
Yeah, and that's what I feel like a lot of people don't understand, and they're so ignorant, and which I guess will lead me to a new question, is that, do you think if everybody knew, because if
Yes.
everybody could trace their family tree all the way back, we'd all end up on one person, or
Yep.
or monkeys, which is what we were.
Right.
And what a lot of people don't realize is that the world is too hard for them to imagine that we're all related. So what I try to do to explain people is say, let's say we put everybody on an island like Ireland, or an island off of Africa. You keep people there for 2,000 to 3,000 years, they're all going to be related to each other.
Of course.
Really.
Of course. We're all, that's why Ashkenazi
Sorry, I
Jewish.
don't mean to interrupt you, but I just said my point is that I think that if we were to trace everybody's family back to see how we're related, because if you put the Earth in perspective, like if you go to the Air and Space Museum, I love that they do the Earth. You are here, and inside this huge, vast, universe. Like, no wonder we're all related. The Earth isn't that big when you think about it, and I really think it would actually help end racism if we all knew our history.
Precisely. One of the reasons I do Finding Your Roots, and one of its subliminal political messages, is that despite our apparent physical differences, at the level of the genome, we are 99.99% the same. And the reason we're 99.99% the same is that we're all cousins. Yeah. Absolutely. And the reason that Ashkenazi Jewish people have certain particular genetic diseases is because cousins were marrying cousins, but they were isolated in the Pale of Settlement by Catherine the Great starting in 1791. So you're absolutely right. I think that my goal is to defeat racism. My goal is to show that we are all the same, and that 300 years ago, during the Enlightenment, ironically named, philosophers such as Hume and Kant, particularly Kant and Thomas Jefferson, used these apparent differences to create a construct that they called races. They declared races to be biological, and that we were as different as a horse is from an ant, and that we had separate Adam and Eves, as it were, called polygenesis. And this was wrong. It was racist. And then they ascribed to these physical differences metaphysical characteristics, character. So physical characteristics connoted mental and psychological and artistic capacities. So there was a pernicious pun between character and characteristics. Your physical characteristics determined who you were, Quinn, and who you could be. All of your possibilities. Look, I remember this Sunday at the Super Bowl features two teams with black quarterbacks. I remember, and your mother remembers, and God knows Ben would have remembered, when people said black people weren't smart enough to be the quarterback. You had to carry all those plays in your head. I'm
actually old enough, Skip, to remember when there were no white quarterbacks at all. I'm almost 50 years old, which I can't believe. I
can't be you. You have eternal youth. No, when there were no white, no black quarterbacks. There were no black quarterbacks at all. And so anyway, that is my goal to Finding Your Roots. So to answer your question pithily, yes, I believe that fighting racism, I believe that one of the most effective tools for fighting racism and all this ethnic bigotry is through genealogy. And I think that's why 2 million people a week turn the TVs on and watch Finding Your Roots. I've often, let me finish. I'm in an airport, some big guy with a MAGA hat, Make America Great hat. They'll come over to me. I go, oh my God. And they'll say, Dr. Gates, I don't like your politics, but I love your show. Can I have a selfie? I go, sure, brother.
That's funny. I really hope it would actually end, if we viewed each other all the same. I feel like it would help end mental disabilities almost. It would depression more than anything.
Depression.
I agree.
I think it's good therapy, and any way that I can help you spread that message, you can count on me. So one more question, because I got my next Zoom with the student. Remember, I have a day job. I'm a teacher.
I would love, this is more of a statement for you to see if you'd be interested, or if you've ever done anything like this. But I was just wondering what I'm curious what the biggest personal family tree you have ever seen is. And my second question or statement is, I think it would be great if two people or somebody like you and me came together, got a huge group of people to actually create the world's biggest family tree instead of just, through DNA, which is what scientists are doing. They're creating, oh, this is the world's biggest DNA family tree. Well, I don't want to just see DNA family tree and how human migration. And I love that, how mapping human migration. I actually want to see a physical, huge, one big great family tree.
No, I would love that. Let's think about how we could do that. So I'm game for that. But what was the first part? Your question?
What is the biggest personal family tree that you've seen?
Well, compared to yours, nothing. Like an anthill. You're like Mount Everest of genealogy.
I'd love to send you a link to my family tree.
Okay, I would blur over. But we've had several guests who go back to Charlemagne and to Arnulf, Charlemagne's grandfather. So that's for you very boring, but believe me, it is very exciting to normal people, Quinn. And
I'm sure.
You're a genius. You have a PhD in genealogy. All
right, brother. Because just one more quick statement. For the longest time, I just thought Bradlee was English and boring and blah blah blah, not really that exciting. And then I found out that the name Bradlee is English. It comes from England, but the lineage actually goes back to Scotland.
Right.
And before Scotland. So in Scotland, we're descendant of a guy named, oh my God, I forget his name. But we're descended from a guy named Dunkeld, who started the Royal House of Dunkeld.
Wow.
In Scotland. And he, with DNA, has proved that he is a direct descendant of the High King Neil of Ireland.
Yeah, but I'm descended from him.
So we're cousins. See, this is what I'm talking about.
My Y-DNA is R1, whatever it is, and it's Niall of the 9 hostages was my, great. That's my oldest ancestor, and there's no doubt that I have the O'Neill haplotype. That's it.
So Bradlee, that is the paternal line. We go all the way back to the first people that came over from the Iberian Peninsula into Ireland.
That's fabulous. Well,
and in Egypt, they married into the pharaohs.
Well, it's nice to meet you, cousin.
Nice to meet you. That's what I'm talking about.
All right, let's do this again in a month.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much, Kip.
And I admire what you're doing, Quinn, and I'll help you in any way I can. I'm sorry I can't put you on the show.
That's fine.
Please tell Sally, your mother's a very amazingly talented person, very beautiful too. And please give her my love, okay?
I will. Thank you so much, Kip.
Okay, bro. Bye.
All right. Bye.